It doesn't take much, does it? One little article by Pierre Lebrun and the world loses their minds. No, Sidney Crosby is not coming to Montreal. At least not yet. Let's discuss. Hey gang, Costa here from Puck Talk Montreal, and as always, thank you for the repeated support of the channel as we've just breached 2,600 subscribers. Now, before we get into the crux of the matter, talking about Sidney Crosby, I wanted to go back a few shows ago when I exploded about the new logo at the Bell Center. Everybody was in an uproar. Oh, you're not progressive enough. Oh, it's fun, it's new, it's this, it's that. I still think it's crap, but I wanted you to understand where I was coming from, okay? Because after all, it's not super ugly. It's nowhere near as bad as, let's say, for example, the Florida Panthers. The design is kind of supposed to replicate the inside of the Stanley Cup to a certain degree. The spokes coming out, the rim around the edges. That's what I get from this, right? And if that's the case, that's fine. But my biggest issue is it's red. Too many shades of red. Dark, light, you name it. And that could be problematic. But in order to understand my traditionalism, I need to take you back. As far back as 1967, when the Montreal Canadiens played at the Montreal Forum and Montreal was hosting the Expo 67. I could have gone further back, but unfortunately, I don't have 30 days to talk about the rink. Now, this is the layout courtesy of the faceoff.net of the Montreal Forum back in the day. And as you can see, one of the things about the rink was the boards were more square, nowhere near as round as they are now. And as we move ahead, this comes from 1974, where they actually made the corners more like rounded corners to avoid any type of injury to players. But here's the fun part. As you go to 1976, where, it's just the Olympics, nothing really changes. And then in 1977, oh my God, look at that. From gray to white. Yes, the ice did not become white until the mid-70s. Why did it become white? Well, here's the answer to that fun bit of trivia. Players were complaining that the arenas weren't lit up enough and that they were losing the puck on the darker ice. So the league mandated that every team paint their ice white before they go over and put in their circles and logos and what have you. Here's the other thing. As you look at the ice, you've got Habs logos on either side, really rudimentary because at the time they were drawn by hand. They weren't drawn with a stencil or anything of the sort. That came later in 1985, where the Montreal Canadiens finally decided, let's get professional. Not only did they change the logo and make it more like it looks like today, but they also raised the glass to the 10-foot standard that we now have in the NHL. Not all the way around, obviously, but on most of the ice, it was especially in the corners, it was at 10 feet. But this is the logo that was on the ice when the Montreal Canadiens won their last Stanley Cup. That remained the same all the way through until they moved to the Molson Center. Back in 1995, 96, excuse me. And the logo got a little bit bigger at center ice, and you had Centre Molson. Well, guess what? Just shortly after that, they made the logos just a little bit bigger. Oops, I think I went too far. There you go. They made them a little bit bigger. So now they took out most of the halves on either side of center, still remaining with that traditional look that the Forum had way back in the day. Then, I forget what year it was. Let me go back and look. I believe it was in 2019. You got the renaming of the Bell Center. Then in 2019, they went to the one logo at center template. And the only issue I had with this was the fact that it cut the logo in half. I didn't like that very much, despite, it still looking like the CH and being visible. The fact is that cutting the logo in half really didn't do it for me, right? It's like taking the 50-yard line and cutting it through the Dallas Cowboys logo. It just doesn't work. You normally put the line underneath, right? Well, they didn't do that. And then you get to today's, which is all red. And, it's got two tones of red, blue, white, and it's not really all that beautiful. I mean, you take a look at it. Of course, there's going to be corporate logos on the ice eventually. But as you take a look at it, there's nothing to it, really. But the reason I bring it up is this. Imagine you're a player. You've already had the situation where, the ice had to go from gray to white because of lighting, not being able to see the puck, etc. But then you're a player now skating through the neutral zone. And I say this about every rink, whether it's Florida, Vegas, which has black in their logo, the list goes on and on. Every single one of the rinks that has the complete center circle painted in the National Hockey League, like Vegas, like Florida, like the Ottawa Senators. The one thing I don't like about it is the fact that if a player skates through and momentarily loses sight of the puck, they'll have a little bit of a hard time picking it up again. And you're going to think I'm exaggerating, but being able to see the puck while you're skating is a skill in and of its own, right? A lot of us, I'm sure when you go out and play shinny, you look at the puck quite often because, your stick handling, you don't want to run into anybody, whatever the case is. Now, when a professional hockey player skates up the ice with the puck, he's got it in front of him, and he's got to see it with his peripheral vision, right? So now if he looks up to see if there's a hit coming and then loses the puck in his periphery, what do? It can be a challenge to pick up that puck, trust me. It's hard enough, visors, reflections, fog, you name it. Now you're pulling color into the equation. With a little puck, a little black puck, which also is no longer all black. It's also got color on it with different logos. So ask yourself, why are you making it more difficult? And I understand the need for progression. I don't have a problem with it. But I am also a traditionalist. Why not go back to having two logos at center ice and having the ice white, right? Why not, instead of having this monstrosity at center, use the outside as like a band and keep the middle white? Much like the Dallas Stars do, where they have the star in the middle in their logo, and they have Dallas Stars on the outside. You could do something similar at center ice like that and still maintain that traditionalism where you're not filling the entire circle with color. It's one of those things that irks me, right? In the sense that you're taking away from the game in order to market. It's bad enough we've already got digital signs that we see on TV where, players in certain colors disappear from time to time in the advertisements. You've seen it. I've seen it. We've also seen it glitch. We've got ads on the ice. We've got ads on the glass. There's stuff everywhere. So why do this? You don't have to market the Montreal Canadiens. What you need to do is refresh it. And yeah, you could do it without it being this. It doesn't have to be all red in the middle. And you know what? Maybe I'll put it together and I'll show you. I'll find another team and I'll mix and match and I'll try to make the logo for you so you can understand. But it's a lot like what I'm talking about with the old Montreal Hockey Talk logo. The middle was red, that could be white, and the outside could be blue. And then you still appease the ownership that wanted a variance of color. Because after all, Jeff Molson's the one that asked for it. But I'll leave it to you. We'll let it lie. Maybe, just maybe, we'll get used to it. Maybe it's too red now, but with the final coats of ice on them, it may be a little bit lighter and more presentable. I don't know. We shall see. But right now, I just don't like it. I'm a traditional guy with the two logos. I don't know about you. Put it in the comments. Now, let's talk a little bit about Sidney Crosby. Now, earlier this offseason, everybody was in an uproar, or the Canadiens are going to go out and get Sidney Crosby, and, he's going to come to Montreal, and he's going to be our second-line center, and the whole 9 yards. And of course, none of that happened. But now, it seems that after a couple of comments, everybody once again believes that Sidney Crosby is going to come to Montreal. Here's what I already know, and I've shared this with you guys. Sidney Crosby's focus is so focused right now is not really the Pittsburgh Penguins. The sole reason he is in the NHL at this moment and hasn't already retired is because he wanted one final shot at the Olympics. He's going to play out this season in Pittsburgh and see where it goes from there. You know, he could very well retire. He could very well ask for a trade. We don't know. But here is what we do know. Sidney Crosby was asked about the whole Montreal thing. And now we know during the Four Nations face-off when Team Canada played in Montreal, Sidney Crosby got a massive ovation, and he loved it. Because after all, there isn't a Canadiens fan alive that doesn't remember 2005 when we found out that Sidney Crosby, the projected next generational player of the NHL, was a massive Canadiens fan growing up. And so he had a comment where he said, well, maybe we'll use this one. Growing up a Montreal Canadiens fan and being from not too far from there, I understand how passionate they are. To know that another team wants you, it's not the end of the world. It could be worse. And now what I read from that is just, it feels good to be wanted, in a market other than Pittsburgh. And that the respect that people have for his game is genuine. It's not just because he's a Pittsburgh Penguin that Pittsburgh fans love him. He's loved across the league. That's what he sees from this. And he likes the fact that he's loved in Montreal. It's a nice feather in his cap, right? But then you have Pierre Lebrun interviewing Pat Brisson. And now Pat Brisson is Sidney Crosby's agent. And Brisson comes out and says, back in February, Crosby's agent said the possibility of Sidney leaving Pittsburgh is just baseless rumors. Fast forward to the article with Pierre Lebrun where he says, it's always a possibility, It's been 3 years since Pittsburgh has made the playoffs. It all depends on how Sid is going to be and how the team is going to do. I believe that should be in the playoffs, playing in the playoffs every year. You know what this is called, don't you? It's called posturing. It's basically a way of letting the Pittsburgh Penguins know shit or get off the pot. Either you do something to make the team better, or we're going to think about jumping ship. It's not about Crosby wanting to leave. It's about him wanting to play playoff hockey, meaningful hockey. And he wants to do that before he retires, which is why he's staying for the Olympics. Because after all, winning another gold medal for Team Canada would be meaningful. But nobody's expecting the Pittsburgh Penguins to make the playoffs this year. They haven't really done anything to improve. And Kyle Dubas, well, he's doing what he did in Toronto. He's sitting there punching his numbers, looking at his fancy stats, trying to put a good team together, and that's just not working. To boot, Evgeny Malkin is planning on retiring at the end of the year. So as the trade deadline comes along, or he's expected to retire anyway, but as the trade deadline comes along, that's when we're really going to have a better idea as to what Sidney wants to do. And keep this in mind as well, right? Right now, the Canadiens only have $4.5 million of cap space. And some of it will accrue, through injury and whatever, and it'll vary. But here's the thing. With the new rules, you need to make sure you're cap compliant with the 20 players you play in the playoffs, right? Which I think the Canadiens will be able to handle without an issue. But the one thing that I do worry about is moving forward because, as I've stated multiple times with any player that we acquire, there are two contracts that are going to come up sooner rather than later because of the fact that the Canadiens jumped a year of eligibility for both Lane Hutson and Ivan Demidov. Hudson, we talked about it all summer. They're negotiating his new contract as we speak. Where it lands, we don't know. Whether the sticking point is term or cash, it remains to be seen. But there's also Demidov, who, like Hudson, missed his first year of eligibility. Well, they burnt his first year of eligibility, and he managed to play not just the last 2 games of the season, but also 5 games in the playoffs, which in and of itself is good experience for Demidov anyway. But now it puts the Canadiens behind the 8 ball. Not only do they have to sign Hudson this year, but they have to sign Demidov next year. And depending on how he performs, that dinero is going to be higher rather than lower for both players, right? Calder winning defenseman in Hudson, possible Calder winning forward in Demidov. Remains to be seen whether he performs that way. We all think he will. We all hope he does. But we don't want to put undue pressure on the kid, right? But at the end of the day, if he wins the Calder, the Canadiens, you know the cap is going up in the next 2 years by almost $20 million. Pretend that cash is already spent, because that's pretty much what these two guys are going to ask for. And therein lies the issue. How are you able to fit a guy like Sidney Crosby under the cap? He just signed a 3-year extension, so he's got this year plus another 2 to play. So how do you manage to keep everybody under the cap with Sidney there? Yes, there are people that are going to be UFAs that are going to come off, and there may very well be some flexibility there. But you have to plan ahead. And looking at Sidney Crosby at $8.7 million may not very well be the way you want to go. Now, if the Canadiens can get the Penguins to retain some of that money, that would be great. But I don't foresee that happening, because the Canadiens are going to have to send a hell of a package over to Pittsburgh to get Sidney. It's not going to be as simple as saying, okay, we're going to give you a 3rd-round pick and that's it. No. You're looking for a 1st-rounder for Sidney Crosby, even at his current age. It's as simple as that. And don't tell me no, because Pittsburgh is going to be looking for a 1st-round pick, no matter what they do. If they don't get a 1st-round pick, they're not going to trade him. Okay? He's not going to hold them hostage like that. Will they want to move him out of respect? Most likely. But you never know what happens between. We know how Kyle Dubas can be, right, from what he did in Toronto. We know what kind of a stickler he can be for the way he does business. So will that reflect poorly on Sid? We'll see. But this is the second team that Dubas has destroyed with his advanced analytics, and I hope there isn't going to be a third. But at the end of the day, if the Canadiens can't open up the cap space, they could, but if they can't, what do you do? And then you've got other players coming up the pipe as well. There's going to be a Michael Hage down the road. There's going to be David Reinbacher down the road. You're going to have to renegotiate with some of your other defensemen. What do you do? It's an interesting dilemma. You've got to look at it. You've got to look at the entire recipe, because right now, as it stands, Kent Hughes has a really good balance of players. Young and old, expensive and cheap, keeping him within the cap. Right? But as an example, say in 3 years' time, Jacob Fowler comes up to the Canadiens and steals the show. You've got to sign him to a contract. What do? Do you have the money? Because the Canadiens have tied up a lot of their money on defense and forward, which is fine. But eventually you're going to have to tie up some cash in a quality goaltender. Montembeault at 3.75 is a discount. It's a really cheap deal, right? Granted, he needed to prove himself as a starting goaltender, but he's done it so far. We'll see how it goes this season, whether he's better or not. But at the end of the day, Jacob Fowler, if he comes out and he proves himself, he's not going to be asking for $3.75 million. He's going to be asking for $4, $5, and $6 million on a long-term deal. What do you do? Ask yourself, if you're Kent Hughes, how do you foresee this, right? Even if you do get a little bit more cap compliant, you're still going to need to spend more money on some of your younger veterans and give them a pay raise. It's not as simple as going up $1 million or going to arbitration. That's not going to happen all that often. For guys that are up here as far as the quality of play, right? When you're looking at a Demidov, a Hudson, a Fowler, the list goes on and on. You know, you're going to be looking at that with Hage. You're going to be looking at that with Reinbacher. You need to make sure you have enough space to be able to do that. So how can you go out and get an older Sidney Crosby when you've got these other guys that you're going to have to take care of? Now, granted, people are saying Hage may very well take another couple of years to come to the NHL, and that's fine. But there are a lot of people, including myself, who think that David Reinbacher may very well make the Canadiens this season. That's year 1 of eligibility, which means in another 2 years, you have to re-sign him. He's going to get a raise. And how high do you go? All depends on his play. But if he plays as well as is predicted, you're looking at another $4, $5 million for a defenseman. So think about it for a minute. How much do you want to go? Where do you want to go with this Sidney Crosby thing? Personally, I don't want the Canadiens to put too much money into an older player and prohibit younger guys from coming up. I'm patient enough to wait another year, maybe 2, to get a second-line center, Draft one, develop one. I don't care. Maybe get one in a trade. I don't care. Maybe Zach Bolduc learns to take faceoffs and he becomes that second line center. Maybe Marty St. Louis decides to play Demidov after his first season at center to see how he goes because he played center at SKA. Maybe. We don't know. But it all remains to be seen. Ultimately, I would have loved to have Sidney Crosby in Montreal 5, 6, 7 years ago. That didn't happen. I'm not going to hold my breath that he's going to come to Montreal now. I like where this team is going. I don't want them to go back to, okay, let me go get an overpriced older guy just to appease my fan base. That's not what I want. And yes, Sidney's going to be able to put up 70, 80, 90 points a season. That goes without saying. But by God, man, can't you see that for Demidov? Can't you see that for maybe Patrick Laine if, the guys play well together? Their numbers could come up. So why not? That's the question here. Do you really want to put that much into an older player when you've got younger players coming up the pipe that are going to be here in a couple of years? And you don't want to tie up that money on the cap in order to be able to appease the guys that you already have. Think about it. I listen, if it fits under the cap and they can get him, by all means go. But I'm not going to do that with the risk of losing a young player because I don't have enough cap room to sign him. I know Mike Matheson's going to be gone at the end of the year. I get that, right? That's going to open up another 4.5, whatever it is, million on the salary cap. I get it. Okay. And I know that there's going to be the increase by $9 million next year or something to that effect. So it's going to be $18 million of cap space for the Canadiens they're going to have if they don't use the 4.5 this year, which they probably will. But I'm just saying, and then who else comes off the cap? I think Gallagher's still got one more year after this one. I'm not quite sure about, let me look at that. I'm not quite sure whether or not Josh Anderson comes off. I don't think he does, but I've been wrong before. Where are we here? Canadiens. Let me see. Who's UFA? Patrick Laine, of course, is UFA. That's $8.7 million off the cap. Sammy Blais, who cares? But then you've got a bunch of UFAs after that. We only have some big UFAs coming up at the end of the 2026-27 season, which would be, 1 year before Sidney Crosby has his contract expire. That would be Gallagher, Kirby Dach. Doc, of course, is going to be RFA at the end of the season. Josh Anderson, and Joe Veleno. So Joe Veleno also is going to be UFA. So this year, there's going to be 8.7 coming off the cap with Patrick Laine. But the thing is, will the Canadiens re-sign Laine? That's another question you got to ask yourself. If you're going to go out and get Sid and you decide to get away from Patrick Laine, then that's okay. I don't have a problem with that. But if your intention is to keep Laine and he doesn't take a hometown discount, then there's an issue. And that's a discussion they have to have with Laine sometime this year and maybe re-sign him for less money. But if they're good, he's intending on getting $9 million. He knows he's not a $9 million player. I don't think he's that greedy, right? So I think he's going to take a pay cut, to be honest, in order to stay in Montreal. But we'll see. If that happens, then you know what? The dominoes are starting to fall into place, and we have room for Sidney Crosby. But we got to make sure we have that room. I don't want the team handcuffed. It's as simple as that. So tell me what you think. Do you want the Canadiens to absolutely maneuver to be able to get Sidney Crosby? Does it absolutely have to be Crosby as your second-line center? We did say, after all, that your second-line center has to be able to win at least 55% of your faceoffs and be a 50 to 60-point player. Crosby fits that bill, but there are also other players that are cheaper and younger than Crosby that also fit that bill. Whether or not they're available is a completely other story. But let me know. Put it in the comments. Bye for now.